All right. Well, good morning, and thank you for those who are in the council chamber and those who are online. My name is Christy Steffi, and I'm the parking superintendent. Today, we are going to talk about the Casanova Oak Knoll
I
neighborhood.
think you're muted. Forgive me.
I did unmute.
No, I think. Okay, why is it muted on there? Sorry. Okay, go ahead. My
Well,
bad.
hopefully I am not muted. We're going to talk about the Casanova Oak Knoll neighborhood parking. As some of you may or may not know, we have been working on revamping our residential parking programs across the city. And as part of those efforts, we are now looking at extensions areas of the current core program. Casanova Oak Knoll is unique in that parking is only really impacted during special events at the fairgrounds. And this meeting is intended to look at how the current program is structured, what are the current challenges, and then maybe explore some options to improve the effectiveness of the program. I do want to mention that we are streaming this on Zoom. However, there is not an interactive option. For those who are on Zoom, I want to mention that you can still engage and share your feedback and questions by using the Have Your Say Monterey page, which on the screen there is haveyoursay@monterey.org/residential-parking-program. We do have Lee in our meeting who will be monitoring it live. And with that, I want to introduce who I have with me. So I do have Lee Bradley here, who is our assistant parking superintendent and is actively monitoring the Have Your Say page. And we also have Julie Dixon and Ben Verdugo with Dixon Resources Unlimited, a professional parking consultant company. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to Julie to kick off our presentation.
Great. Thank you, and thank you all for joining us here today. We know that parking is a very sensitive topic in where you live, and we have been receiving quite a bit of feedback. I will share, it's important to recognize that the feedback is quite diverse. We actually have kind of all sides of the spectrum on opinions of whether we want the barricades, we don't want the barricades, we want parking regulated, we don't want parking regulated. And that is really important when we talk about trying to right size a solution for your neighborhood and is trying to find that balance. But before we get into the details and some of the recommendations moving forward, let's first talk a little bit about kind of how we got to be where we are. Back in 1987, the resolution was established, and the program provides the 1 hour zone except by permit. It is street specific. There's 12 streets currently and 215 addresses that are affected by this current program. Today, permits are issued 4 per household with a 5-year cycle, and those permits today are currently free. And when we do have events, we call it a double site zone, which means that you basically can receive a penalty of $96 if you exceed the posted time limit. Barricades are placed by the city for major events. There's usually about, I think, 4 to 5 of those a year where the blockades are put up to basically indicate the signage of the regulations and highlight, for the resident parking only. And the city does send letters on an annual basis about those enforced events at the fairgrounds. We know that times have changed, and we know that we have more frequent events at the fairgrounds. And that is an important factor as we talk about quality of life and where you live and the impact that it does have in your neighborhood. And that's one of the reasons why we are here today, because as we talk about those issues that have been identified, we really want to talk about how we can, again, I call it right size a program that will work for the neighborhood as well, and recognizing the fact that it does affect your quality of life, your ability to have friends or family over and to entertain, understandably. And this is something that, I do like to share. If you live in a beach community, the effects that you have living near a beach, living near a major venue like the fairgrounds is something that we recognize does have an effect. So some of the issues being identified is that the coverage for parking enforcement is not consistent, and that oftentimes the coverage does not align with all of the events that are occurring, and that it does not appear that the $96 penalty is much of a deterrent for many. It seems that again is really just not an imposition, so folks are willing to take the ticket, and that it's not clear how to define an event. And I think that that's what's really become very prevalent to us from the feedback from the neighborhoods is really what defines an event and what is really having an impact in the neighborhood. And then currently the temporary barricades are challenging to institute. So the fact that we do have to put them up in advance, and then we do have 200 A-frames that we put up during the events. It's also challenging to break those down. And we know that several of the neighbors have posted comments saying that they're an inconvenience, they're not attractive, and something that they just don't appreciate, and that we do have spillover parking into the adjacent neighborhoods as well. So some of the suggested improvements. One of the things, first and foremost, and I'm actually going to jump to the second to the last bullet here, is we know that there's an opportunity on Fairgrounds Road to implement paid parking, and that's actually going to be one of the first things at the very tippy top of the list. And I think that's important for me to bring to the forefront because some of the items that we are going to suggest here is going to be where you as neighbors are going to collectively have to decide how you want to proceed. So I say that because as I kind of outline some of the opportunities of what you all can consider, we wanted you to know in the forefront that it is our intention to make a recommendation to City Council. We'll be going to City Council on November 4th. So one of the many items that'll be on there is the opportunity to consider paid parking on Fairgrounds Road. So that's important because as we now talk about how to manage parking moving forward in the neighborhoods, we wanted you to really kind of have all the cards on the table as we think about this. Before I start to go into these individual bullets, I'd like to first lay out a couple of, I'll call it parking theories. And this is important because when we talk about how parking should be managed, one of the things that I like to share with anybody that'll talk to me about parking is there's no such thing as free parking. And that's important. Even the parking space out in front of your home, the parking space out in front of a business, or a parking space even at the Target shopping center. Every single one of those parking spaces has a value. And one of the things historically that's happened here in Monterey is that parking permits have been given away for free. And that is something that is going to change. And I wanted to put that in the forefront for you because as we talk about the options for your neighborhood moving forward, it's important that you recognize this because as we move forward with City Council, the recommendation is that we are going to be redesigning the residential parking permit program citywide so that those neighborhoods that have a parking permit program will have to go through a qualifying process, which I will explain. And if a parking permit program is approved and accepted by the neighborhood and then council, ultimately there will be a fee associated with a parking permit. And there will also be limitations on the number of parking permits that you are eligible for by household. That's important to recognize. And I will highlight that this is not intended to be a revenue generating opportunity. In fact, Proposition 26 basically mandates that the city simply can recover the cost. A residential parking permit program has to be designed to be sustainable, where it basically pays for itself. So one of the things that I can share with you is that historically, how we've managed parking in the past is that the permit program has been something that the city has operated in a loss. And if you've been following the headlines of Monterey and pretty much every other city in California, we can no longer afford to operate programs that basically cost the city's money. And so by Prop 26, we have the opportunity to basically make sure that we right size this program so that it covers the cost of the operation and administration and enforcement of the program. So I'm putting all the cards on the table so that when I lay out the opportunities that you all have to consider moving forward, you'll have all of this information at your ready. If you all as a neighborhood want to proceed with a residential parking permit program, whatever that could look like, it could be special event generated, it could be year round, it could be seasonal. Again, this is all part of that determination of this program. The first thing that has to happen is, based on the approval of council on November 4th, would be what's called a petitioning process. A petitioning process basically requires you and your neighbors to basically sign up and say, We all want a residential parking permit program, and what the rules may be, we'll talk about in a moment. But the first thing that would happen if this code, the municipal code update, is again proposed to move forward here later this year, would be that you would have to subscribe with 85% of your neighbors. And one of the policies that have been put into the draft update is that it would have to be 4 contiguous blocks at minimum of 85% of those addresses that would say, we want some type of residential permit program. Again, whether seasonally, special event driven, or year round. And then ultimately, once that petition is signed and validated, then you go into the process to be able to get the approvals by the city for said program. Again, whatever the determination of the neighborhood is, let's just say they determine as a whole that you want it to be special event driven. Once the program is authorized and approved by resolution by city council, there's one other step before the program can go live. Would be 51% of the households have to buy into said program. So 50+1 households that are in that designated 4 block or more area would have to purchase a parking permit before the program could go live. That's important because then as we start to talk about these next steps, that's when you now start to see the ball rolling. Once 51% of the households have bought into the program and it's within a designated time frame, that's then when you start to see the signage being installed and basically the formalization of the plans moving forward. And one of the ideas that if the neighborhood opted for this to be special event driven, we would have to define what a special event is and what size of the special event is that basically the neighborhoods want to be governed and monitored. And then one of the ways that we thought that we could effectively manage that is twofold. We have the option to leverage QR codes on the signs so that if someone was parking in the neighborhood, they would be able to validate if a special event is occurring that day and whether or not special event rules were in place. We also would have the opportunity to have signs that actually have, I'll call them hinges on them or flaps on them that we could actually pull down to be able to demonstrate that it is an event day. Signage like this could be introduced at the entrances to the neighborhood so that we didn't have to really deal with sign blight, but basically kind of like when you enter a city limits and you see maybe signage that says no oversized vehicles parking between 2 and 5 a.m. Signage like that could be something that we could leverage on the approach to the to the neighborhood as well. Another thing that we know is important when we talk about if the interest is special events is actually increasing that penalty and introducing a special event zone penalty. You can see that currently in Berkeley, they have a $225 per citation fee. I believe that's particularly on game days when they have football games, so that if you break the rules in the residential neighborhoods, the penalties that day are $225. Any permit that's going to happen moving forward in this city of Monterey for residential parking will have a fee associated with it. The fee has not been finalized nor determined, but I will just share with you based on other similar municipalities, the range of a residential parking permit fee. I've seen it from anywhere between $30 to about $70. Again, a lot of it just depends on the operations and the costs associated with the program, but typically it's intended to, again, be as low cost as possible, and that's an annual parking permit fee, and that would be something that would be introduced and very clear to everyone. And then the communications with the fairgrounds, again, to be able to understand and ensure that we have those defined special event days. We're also proposing that as we talk about these bigger plans and bigger approaches, is the opportunity to consider a shuttle program that again helps bring people to the fairgrounds rather than parking at the fairgrounds. I mentioned the implementation of the paid parking on Fairgrounds Road. And then the other thing that we can talk about also moving forward is what we say status quo. The barricades, the use of the temporary barricades, but I do want to highlight that if parking permits are needed or required, there are fees associated with that program moving forward. And I think that's really the one factor that we want everyone to understand when we talk about how to manage this moving forward. So a couple of things before we open it up for comments, and I want to first highlight is that for those of you that are online, you'll see that we have the haveyoursaymonterey.org web address here on the screen. We are actively monitoring the posts as we speak. So if you had a question or a comment that you wanted to add, please put it there. Anyone that has posted a comment prior to this meeting, we have received and responded and acknowledged those. So I just wanted to highlight that. And you also can track the progress of the parking program and sign up for parking news emails on that website. And I just want to reiterate, November 4th is the day that we are planning to bring this program and the recommendations to City Council. Just going to look to my colleague Christy and see if I covered everything. Good, perfect. So I'll pause there and I'll first look to Lee and see, Lee, is there anything that's been posted on the chat? Not yet. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to ask a question or pose a comment or share any of your feedback? Yes, sir.
I have 4 permits right now, and sometimes I don't use it for family. We might have some over fixing it. But I still have to get 3 or 4 permits for the
Great question. So I know that you're just so everybody online can hear, the question was, I currently have 4 permits, but I might have a repair person coming over. Would I still be eligible for 4 parking permits? So some of this will be determined by the neighborhood and what type of permit program you are seeking. So if this was a typical residential neighborhood program that was, just status quo, we're basically 24/7, 365. Most programs are designed where only licensed drivers are eligible for a parking permit, so that if I live by myself, I'm only eligible for 1 parking permit. And then some communities allow for guest parking passes. So this is some of the determination that would be needing to be identified by the neighborhood of what kind of program you would want. But using the example that you used for a repair person, twofold. What some communities have done is they've introduced what we call a contractor permit. A contractor permit is something that I can sign up for because the plumber's coming into town, or like I'm doing work on my house. So there's workarounds for things like that. But the other thing that would be important to recognize is, depending upon the preference of the neighborhood and what this program could be designed for, ideally you would have time limits posted that would be able to accommodate or support said repair person. So if it was an existing 1 or 2 hour parking time limit, ideally that would support that type of need or that type of service. But what I will also share, having worked in neighborhoods that do have permit parking, oftentimes when I know that the plumber's coming, I park my permitted car on street and the plumber parks in my driveway if they're going to be there for an all day type of an event. So it just takes some strategic planning is really the key. The one other thing that I want to really highlight is when we do talk about a parking permit program and the penalties that we're talking about and the fees that we're talking about, this also goes to the funding of the parking enforcement personnel, which we know was a big concern for many of the posts that we've received and many of the comments that we received from neighbors, is that want for more consistent coverage. And that's also what you do when you design a parking permit program, is you're ensuring that you also have the resources to help monitor and enforce the policies as well. So that's an important part when we talk about this overall design, is to make sure that we have the continuity and the consistency and the visibility of personnel out there to back up the program as well. Does that answer your question? Please.
2 more up.
Of course.
Our driveway is short and narrow, and most commercial plumbing or electric trucks can't do that.
Sure.
That's just a concern there. I've actually done that sometimes. But then will we be required to have a name and like a also a driver's license for each permit? Because sometimes we'll have guests from out of town and they have no way of getting their driver's license information.
Yeah, great question. So the question has to do with first narrow driveway. What if the plumbing vehicle can't fit in my driveway? And then second to that was what information would I need from my guests or visitors in order for them to park? All great questions. So ultimately, when we talk about whatever the neighborhood decides in their petitioning process and how they want to move forward, if a permit program was approved and everybody signs into it, everything in the permit program would become license plate based. So the permits, yep, no more decals, no more pieces of paper, none of that. What happens is all of our vehicles have what is a unique identifier, a license plate on our car. And so everything that we would be doing moving forward would all become license plate based. And so depending upon how the neighborhood proceeds and how you all decide you want this program to be managed, if guest parking permits were a portion of this program, what would end up happening is you would have an online account where when your friend or visitor got there, you actually have the ability to input their license plate when they arrive to basically recognize them as a valid guest parking space. When I mentioned licensed driver, that has to do with you as a resident. When you basically apply for your permit, it's basically to prohibit me who lives by myself, but I have 6 cars, I'm only eligible for 1 parking permit. Versus if I live in a household and Christy, me, and Ben are all roommates and we all live there as adults and we're all licensed drivers, depending upon how the program is built and designed, typically we would all be eligible for a parking permit. But I will highlight sometimes the fee structures change for the first permit, second permit, and third permit as well. And that's all what goes into the design of the program.
So I guess to paraphrase that to make sure I understand.
Sure.
I could get a permit from myself and my wife. We each have 1 car.
Yep.
We have 1 car garage and 1 car driveway.
Mm-hmm.
And we have apartments around it. So we fill it with on-street parking. So I could theoretically, if I can afford it, purchase 2 guest permits. And then the night before they arrive, log in, type in like a Sacramento plate, and we'd be good to go.
So technically with what was described was where you live, your ability for you and your wife with the 2 drivers, you would both technically be eligible, again, depending upon how the neighborhood wants to proceed and what the rules are. Ultimately, you both being eligible for a parking permit, yes. Your license plates would be inputted into the system, so you'd have valid parking based on the posted regulations. And then your friends that are coming over from Sacramento, you could definitely pre-enter their information or wait until they got there, depending upon what the guest rules are. Now, I'll add one other factor only because I don't like any surprises in parking. I like everybody to have all the cards on the table, and especially as you and your neighbors consider quality of life, how you want to manage this moving forward. I always like to talk about your own special events. We know special events at the fairgrounds are affecting you. But if I want to have a baby shower or a Super Bowl party or, just have friends over for supper, these are all things that are extraordinarily relevant to a parking permit program. Because what happens is you have to create these types of rules. And I say this because there's pros and cons to everything. And when we talk about permitted parking programs, you do have limitations on your own self when it comes to how you manage your parking resources. So I think that that's just something as you all go about this and talk to your friends and neighbors about how, you all want to manage parking moving forward. It's important to recognize that whatever determination you all make, it does affect your ability to, I'll just say, entertain. Like if I want to have a Super Bowl party and that means 40 people are coming over and there happens to be, whatever rules you all created and you decide it was a special event, way that we're going to go about it. And there happens to be, car week. that's going to affect my ability to have that Super Bowl party and to have available parking for my friends that are coming over. And I'm not saying that as a deterrent. I just want everybody to really think about all of the opportunities that you have when it comes to the decisions that you all make, and knowing that there will be fees associated with any and all of what I described. Yes, sir.
I know in the past, some of the special events have paid for our parking program in our neighborhood. I didn't see in your slides, could you go over how that would affect us? Would that money be going to our neighborhood? Can that drive down the cost of our permits? Or can that cover a huge substantial?
So great question about the covering of the cost. So one of the things we were talking about in our last meeting was something we call parking districts. And what's very common in a lot of communities is the revenues generated in a neighborhood basically stay in a neighborhood and stay in a district after the cost of the program. Now you can appreciate when we start to talk about a cost sustainable design, the program is designed not to generate revenue, but to cover costs. So I would like to just be transparent of saying like I would not anticipate a significant upside that would basically provide that offset. But to your point about the fairgrounds is the opportunity as a neighborhood to see if there's any subsidizing of said program by the fairgrounds. That is a worthwhile conversation of, good neighbor programs. I can't say that they can, will, or do, but I do think there's an opportunity there. When we talk about the costs associated with major events coming into the city, traffic control, factors like that, those are all things that are designed into bigger picture operations that obviously the fairground has to be mindful of. So when it does come to this neighborhood component, it's definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And I think that what's going to be important is you as a neighborhood need to come to a consensus. And I say that because it's very important when we start to talk about regulating parking by permit, it does come with some restrictions. And it's important that you as a neighborhood have to have a general consensus of the majority. That's why we had that 85% number in there, because the city can't come in and say, this is how you're going to do it. This is how you're going to live, because otherwise you're then square peg round holing it. It's important that you as a neighborhood determine, we do want this to be special event driven. We only want it for the major events, or again, I don't want it at all, or I want this 365. Like those are things that are key. Another important factor, like when I was talking about entertaining and having parties, for you all, it might also be an hours of operation thing. Yes, sir.
Could you run us through, say we have 20, we throw a big shower, like you were saying.
Yep.
We have 20 people show up. It's not a special event time. How does that look fee-wise? Could you?
So if you all, because yours is a very unique one, because there's a lot of hypotheticals here, right? So if you all as a neighborhood decide we want this to be special event managed, and we're able to define what a fairground special event is, that then obviously creates a lot more freedom for you as neighbors when it comes to your ability to manage and regulate. And I will mention what I was just about to say. I want to highlight this. The program can also be designed to, what we're trying to do is keep folks that are going to the fairground out of the neighborhood, right? So I'm going to use a really simple example so that you can think about how this would apply to you. If anyone has ever lived near a commuter rail station, like a BART station, oftentimes you will see signage in that neighborhood that says no on-street parking between 9 a.m. and noon. That's very specific because it was designed to keep the commuter from parking in that neighborhood and jumping on the train and going to work, because I can't come back to my car between 9 and noon, right? But what that did was it created the freedom for the neighborhood to not be handcuffed 24/7 by the parking limitations, right? It was just that 3-hour snippet a day that kept the commuters off of my street. I say this because this is where, if there's an ability to design this special event rule so that it minimizes the impact on where you live and then keeps the fairground patrons off of your streets, we need you to tell us what that is. Because the reality of that commuter example is very specific, right? Now people work from home and work all sorts of wacky doodle hours. So now that 9 to noon thing doesn't always work per se. But as you all think about how this could work by design, the opportunity to mitigate that time frame so that it lessens the impact on you all as residents is that sweet spot. And that's the challenge that we have is it narrower? Can it be something very specific to prohibit and encourage people to park where they're supposed to park and not on your streets? I think that's the thing that I don't have what that answer is. And also, if I were to come out here and forecast that, I'd probably get, taken out of here on, yes, sir.
Kind of seems like we're dependent on if you guys put meters along Fairgrounds Road, if that's going to push into our neighborhood.
That's the reason why I wanted to be forthright with you to tell you that it has to be approved by council, but the intention right now is to take that recommendation forward. And that's why we wanted to be very forthcoming with that opportunity so that as you all think about what this means, you could plan accordingly. So knowing that council has to approve any and all of this, but the justification is definitely there. So it would, again, everything's subject to council approval, but it would be something that I would not anticipate them not approving that because again, it's a revenue generation opportunity. Parking needs to be managed and regulated. It's kind of one of those, like, I don't want to say no brainers, but it seems like a very good opportunity for the city. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring that to the forefront so that as you all are talking amongst yourselves, you can think about that. But the other part that I also want to highlight this, and this is something that's important when I talk about parking and like kind of the way it works. There's nothing wrong with saying, let the program be implemented and know that if that has the effect, which we anticipate it will, but also let the effect happen and then let the next step happen as well. Because sometimes we prepare for the worst and then the worst never happens. And one of the things that the city is doing that's really important is they're leveraging data to help influence parking management decisions. So with a deployment of paid parking on Fairground Road, what will happen is not only will that data be monitored, but also the surrounding areas and the surrounding impacts. So that's an important factor as we talk about the impacts moving forward. Sometimes it's great to prepare for a rainy day, but I will also highlight that in this particular case, it might be good to know that we have that trigger to pull if it becomes an issue. But the reality of that, again, it may never come to fruition, but that's why we wanted to be sure you knew that that was the intention so that you could plan accordingly. Yes, sir.
This is a progressive learning experience.
Yep, please.
If we end up having paid parking or meters on Fairgrounds, it's going to be like we're living next to the airport.
Yep.
And at that point, people may want to put a 7-day-a-week parking restriction because the annual rabbit show is not an event.
Right.
But people more. The next thing is, as we're going through this, I'm coming up with more questions, and if I try to explain to my neighbors, they'll have questions that I can't answer.
Sure.
Are staff available if we were to hold a neighborhood meeting in our park center, and you could answer questions and we could sky things? Because I know there are people in our neighborhood that once they get ticketed, they become very against the program.
Sure.
And if we were to make the program workable for everyone, we might be able to get that.
85% of the neighborhood. So
I don't know if we could do that. We could call it 1%.
Right.
The more questions that we can answer, because people fairgrounds have the information. So I get further away.
sure.
I get the people that are willing to park and pay the fine. And then I get the parking people that get fined.
Right.
I was the one who started the parking program on Newport Avenue.
Mhm.
And I originally requested one side of the street to left open for the apartment dwellers.
Right.
And because of the barricade situation, they said we're just going to put barricades on both sides of the street.
Right.
And so we need to connect with the apartment people.
Right.
This is a big public, contact process for us.
Right.
And I think the only way we can be successful is to engage more people and answer their questions.
So I will highlight that we've done several community meetings. I just want to reinforce that. And I will reinforce the haveyoursaymonterey.org email address, web address is important, but the opportunity to share and have feedback with the community is always available. I will tell you, staff has been nothing but communicative, and especially when it comes to this particular area. The sensitivities to the impacts of where you all live is definitely recognized. I do want to highlight something that you described and a couple of things that you've mentioned that I want to reinforce. It is important to recognize that when we talk about this incremental approach to a program, number one, all households are eligible. That's key. Multifamily, apartment buildings, single family housing, that's all on the table. So that's key when we talk about equitability and accessibility. But something that you described, I wanted to mention, and it's kind of like what this fellow had described about if we did paid parking on Fairground, that incremental spillover effect. Oftentimes what can happen is, and what I'm hearing you describe is, it's the streets that are closer to the fairground that have an immediate impact. And it's probably the supplemental streets that maybe not as much buy-in because they don't always have the impact, but it does have an effect. What happens in parking often is that you start with those first 4 blocks, and then gradually that spillover happens, and then blocks can petition in. I think that's something that's important when you recognize a residential parking permit program, is that they're designed to be adaptable. So when you start with those 4 contiguous blocks, the most impacted blocks, right? The ones that are adjacent to the fairground, the other streets may not be interested today, but they could eventually petition in to that district as well. And I think that's what's important to recognize, is that none of this is written in stone so that you're prevented from participating. And the reality is, when we talk about right sizing the program, or like what should the timeframes be, it's also the how big should it be. It's actually ideal to start smaller and then grow, because of the fact that, again, it does affect how you live. It does affect, can I go to the grocery store and pick up my groceries today? Can I go pick up that coffee? Like, these are all realities of where you all live. So I think it's important when we start to talk about work-life balance and how to tie those together. So I would just suggest, for what you described, you can take this incrementally. And if you're not in phase 1, phase 2 or phase 3 could become an option. But staff accessibility, being able to leverage this website, is always available there. And I will just share, we've done quite a few community connections. And if there's a need to have another one, please let staff know. Just in terms of participation, we're happy to go there. Yes, sir.
During these special events, is the fairgrounds ever required to provide parking? I know right next to our neighborhood, they have that empty lot.
Yep.
Sometimes they fill it, sometimes they don't. Obviously, they want to maximize their space in there. But that creates, when they do use it for parking, that creates a buffer between our neighborhood
Yep.
and the noise. Where when they're there for when the fairgrounds is in town, they'll stack a roller coaster right next to that fence.
Right.
So is there any way to require them to provide parking?
We will go back and see what opportunities that we have, and look at also any stipulations in the land use code that basically identify what, if any, requirements are associated with it. So I don't have the answer for you right now, but we'll definitely go back and take a peek at that and see what we can determine as well.
Because there's events that they provide 0 parking.
Right.
Again, when we moved into our house 10 years ago, there was horses in that area.
Yeah.
So it changed a lot. But I think if they have to provide parking,
yep,
then that might help us.
We'll look at that for sure. I'm going to pause here and look at Lee and see, Lee, how are we doing online? Any comments? No comments so far. And how are we doing? Oh, we're right at time. Does anyone else have any other thoughts or feedback that you wanted to share today? Well, thank you very much. We appreciate that. And honestly, I do want to just share, yours is a very engaged neighborhood. I think hopefully you all realize and recognize that. We do read all of the commentary and all of the feedback, which we very much appreciate. I do want to reinforce November 4th is the date that we're heading to council. And that's really the key to make sure, excuse me, that our municipal codes can get updated so that we basically can start to move forward with this. We will work towards getting a couple of the answers that we identified here today. And I just want to thank everybody who's online as well as here in person. And to again, just acknowledge the Have Your Say Monterey.org website. That is a great place to not only track our progress as well, but you can also sign up for updates. And I just want to thank you all for coming out today. You'll always hear me say parking will never be perfect. And we keep working at it and keep chipping away at it. And the one thing as we talk about your neighborhood, I think the opportunity to grow this gradually and to start to make those changes, it will also be something that we know quality of life is a really important factor for you so that we as partners can all work together to try to solve for this. So sorry, we don't have all the answers today, but it'll definitely be a group effort. So yes, sir.
One last question.
Sure.
So the initial vote on this would be the area that is existing as a parking program today?
Well, it's actually up to the neighborhood. I think that's the key, is that when we talk about the baseline rules, you're really talking about 4 contiguous blocks to start off with. So what I would anticipate based on some of the public comment that I've seen is that it's really going to take the neighbors to really come together and to really figure out really what's that right size for this first phase. And it could be bigger than 4 contiguous blocks. I just want to highlight that. But it's really up to you as a neighborhood to determine how you all want to move it forward. I think that's really the key, is that you all are, no pun intended, the drivers behind this initiative to really determine really what this should look like. And importantly, not only the size, but again, special event driven, year-round driven. Is this a Saturday, Sunday thing? Like, these are all things that we just have to think about as a neighborhood for what is going to be the best fit for your neighborhood. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming today. I wish you a beautiful day outside and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for coming. There's one more meeting.